Did you know the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, was not a singular entity, but potentially a role assumed by different individuals throughout history, and that the benevolent Creator God may have also been responsible for some of humanity's darkest moments? Tonight we uncover the truth of the Annunaki god Enlil, the original ruler of humanity, and the profound implications of his actions, which have been intentionally obscured for millennia. To understand this, we must journey back to the cradle of civilization, Sumer, nestled in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Picture this: a thriving society emerging from the mists of prehistory, a society whose myths and legends would echo through the ages, influencing countless cultures and religions. It was here in Sumer that the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, arrived on our planet. According to Sumerian scholars, these were not mythical beings, but advanced extraterrestrials from the planet Nibiru, driven to Earth by a desperate need for gold, a substance vital to repairing their planet's atmosphere. The Anunnaki, led by figures like Enlil, established a presence in Sumer, shaping the course of human history in ways we are only beginning to understand. The primary sources for understanding the Anunnaki are the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, clay tablets inscribed with a writing system that unlocks the secrets of a long-lost world. Among these tablets are epic tales like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, which speak of gods, heroes, and a great flood that once swept across the earth. Interestingly, these Sumerian myths bear striking similarities to biblical narratives, such as the creation story in Genesis, and the account of Noah's Ark. Archaeological evidence suggests these stories are not merely allegories, but reflections of actual events witnessed and recorded by the ancient Sumerians. However, there's a hidden side to this story that most people never hear. But what if Enlil, the Anunnaki god, was not a mythical figure but a real being whose story has been deliberately misinterpreted and hidden from humanity, for reasons of control? What if the benevolent Creator was something more, something seeking to create a peaceful society, a society corrupted by outside influences and his own choices? What if the myths of divine entities manipulating humanity were actually advanced extraterrestrials with technological and social influence? To uncover the truth about Enlil, we need to delve into the ancient Sumerian texts, explore his role in the creation of humanity, and examine the lasting impact of his decisions and the Anunnaki legacy. Prepare to have your understanding of history, religion, and human origins completely transformed as we explore the complete history of Enlil, the god who created Eden and became Yahweh. Was Enlil's history intentionally suppressed? The core of this question lies in understanding whether the traditionally negative portrayal of Enlil is a deliberate misrepresentation, obscuring a far more complex and nuanced reality. What if Enlil was not just a god of wrath, but a key architect of human civilization, whose legacy was later twisted by those seeking to consolidate power? We will investigate the very reasons behind this alleged suppression. Powerful institutions, from ancient priesthoods to later religious movements, may have had vested interests in demonizing or obscuring Enlil's true role. Imagine early kings seeking to legitimize their rule by discrediting their predecessors, including Enlil, whose reign represented a prior era. But what specific aspects of Enlil's story were deemed so dangerous or destabilizing that they needed to be suppressed? Consider Enlil's role in the creation of humanity, the advanced knowledge he imparted, and the social structures he established. Could these very acts have been reinterpreted to serve the agendas of later rulers and religious figures? To begin, let us turn to the Sumerian texts themselves, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic. These texts do not depict Enlil as a one-dimensional villain, but as a complex figure with both positive and negative traits. Consider this passage from the Atrahasis epic, which says, "When the gods like men bore the work and suffered the toil of the gods was great, the work was heavy, the misery was much." This highlights Enlil's role not only as a ruler, but as a leader burdened with difficult decisions regarding labor for those he ruled. Yet contrast this with the passages describing his decision to unleash the flood, which states, "Let there be a flood to destroy mankind." We see that Enlil harbored an internal conflict between creation and destruction. Archaeological findings further support the existence of a sophisticated Sumerian civilization that predates many later cultures. The discovery of cuneiform tablets detailing advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering challenges the notion of Sumerians as primitive people. These tablets are the remnants of a society that flourished under the supposed guidance of Enlil and the Annunaki. This all suggests a pattern of competing narratives, with differing views of Enlil present even within Sumerian society. Some tablets praise Enlil for his wisdom and leadership, while others blame him for the devastation of the flood. Scholars have long argued that later Mesopotamian and biblical accounts deliberately altered or omitted key details from the original Sumerian stories. Take, for example, the character of Noah in the Bible, who bears a striking resemblance to Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Yet the motivations and personalities of these figures and the gods who interacted with them are subtly different, which is no coincidence. These textual discrepancies suggest a deliberate effort to reshape the narrative for specific purposes, focusing on Enlil's character. Why the negative portrayals of Enlil in later texts? It is reasonable to speculate that later rulers or religious figures sought to consolidate their own power by discrediting earlier deities and belief systems. Enlil's role as a god may have been misunderstood or deliberately distorted, with his advanced technology mistaken for divine power, which would need to be diminished. It's important to remember the challenges of interpreting ancient texts, and it is important to acknowledge that our understanding of Enlil is limited by the available evidence. Consider this: even if Enlil's actions were well-intentioned, they may have had unintended consequences that led to his demonization. What if his decisions, made with the best interests of the Anunnaki in mind, ultimately resulted in suffering and destruction for humanity, thus making him responsible in the eyes of later generations? This is the essence of the narrative that has been passed down for millennia. So, if Enlil's story was deliberately twisted, what about his role in the very creation of humanity? Was the Garden of Eden a literal event, and what was Enlil's true part in it? The idea that the Anunnaki may have genetically engineered humans for specific purposes is central to this question. What if the Garden of Eden story is not a simple tale of temptation and expulsion, but a metaphor for a more complex interaction between the Anunnaki and early humans, an interaction that involved genetic manipulation and the imparting of knowledge? Now, let's delve into that. Sumerian creation myths, such as those found in the Enuma Elish and other texts, describe the Anunnaki creating humans as workers. In these myths, we find passages describing the mixing of Anunnaki DNA with that of existing hominids, with Ninhursag, the Anunnaki mother goddess, playing a crucial role in the creation process. It's written that the goddess, the wise mother, pinched off 14 pieces of clay. These 14 pieces resulted in the first humans, created with intent. But what are the implications of this creation story? What does it suggest about the Anunnaki's motives and the very nature of early humanity? The implications are staggering. If humans were indeed created to serve the Anunnaki's needs, such as mining gold, what does this say about our origins and our purpose? Were we simply tools created for the benefit of a more advanced civilization? Or was there something more to this creation, something that has been lost or deliberately suppressed? The ethical implications of genetic engineering and potential for exploitation cannot be ignored, and are vital to understanding this history. Of course, we must acknowledge counterarguments. Was Enlil a benevolent creator, genuinely seeking to improve the human species, or was he a manipulative overlord, exploiting humanity for his own gain? Perhaps Enlil truly believed he was acting in the best interests of humanity, even if his methods were questionable. This all circles back to the questions of his ultimate goals. Building on the creation story, we turn to the story of the Great Flood. If humans were created by Enlil, why did he later try to destroy them? Was it simply an act of divine punishment, as some religious texts suggest, or was there a more strategic decision with complex motivations behind his actions? Perhaps the flood was not an act of retribution, but a desperate measure to correct a flaw in the human design, or to eliminate a threat that had emerged unexpectedly. Let us examine the evidence. The Sumerian flood myth, as recounted in the Epic of Gilgamesh and other sources, describes Enlil's decision to wipe out humanity. Passages describe the reasons for the flood, citing human noise and overpopulation as justification. As it is written, the land grew noisy, the bellowing was too much. Disturbing Enlil, he had heard their clamor. This indicates that Enlil's actions stemmed not from malice, but from a need to maintain order and control. However, the role of Enki, Enlil's brother, in warning Utnapishtim and helping him build an ark, cannot be ignored. Enki, it was stated, warned Utnapishtim in a dream. This division among the Annunaki suggests a conflict of ideologies, a disagreement over the fate of humanity. What then were Enlil's motivations for the flood? Was he acting out of pure, unadulterated anger, or was there a more calculated reason behind his actions? Was the flood intended to eliminate a genetic defect that had emerged in the human population, or to reset human civilization and start anew? The ethical implications of mass destruction, even if intended for a greater good, are immense. It's possible that the flood was not intended to punish humanity, but rather to save it from a greater threat, such as a rapidly spreading disease or an impending environmental catastrophe. But did Enlil act alone, or were other Anunnaki involved in the decision? While some may condemn Enlil for his actions, others might argue that he was right to destroy humanity. If humanity had become a threat to the planet or to the Anunnaki themselves, then perhaps drastic measures were necessary to ensure the survival of both civilizations. What if Enlil had access to knowledge or insights that we are not privy to, knowledge that justified his actions in his own mind? This brings us to the question of Enlil's influence evolving to Yahweh. How did Enlil, this complex and sometimes controversial figure, become the God of the Old Testament? What evidence connects Enlil to the later figure of Yahweh in the Old Testament? Perhaps the transition involved a gradual shift in religious beliefs and cultural practices, with Enlil's attributes and stories being absorbed and adapted by later civilizations. We have explored Enlil's obscured legacy, his role in the creation of humanity, and his decision to unleash the Great Flood. His story has been deliberately misinterpreted and hidden, but how do the different pieces of evidence fit together to create a more complete picture of Enlil's life and actions? Is there a clear connection between the creation story, the flood myth, and the rise of later religious beliefs? Given all of this evidence, who was Enlil really? Was he a benevolent creator, a ruthless destroyer, or something in between? The answer, as we will see, may challenge our understanding of history, religion, and human origins. But we're just scratching the surface, because what we'll discover next is even more shocking as we explore the transition to Yahweh. The transition of Enlil's legacy into the figure of Yahweh is far from a simple, one-to-one replacement. Rather, it represents a complex evolution, a shifting of roles, attributes, and narratives that occurred during a pivotal moment in human history, the Bronze Age collapse and the rise of monotheism. But what if Yahweh inherited more than just a name? What if the very essence of earlier Near Eastern deities, Enlil chief among them, became interwoven with the fabric of this emerging monotheistic god? Did the transition simply co-opt the stories and mythos of Enlil, or did the transition serve the needs of emerging monotheistic religions? Were Yahweh's laws, his penchant for wrathful judgment, and his covenant-making tendencies simply borrowed from Enlil's repertoire of divine actions? Let's get specific. The initial layer of evidence lies in the linguistic connections between the names Enlil, El, and Elohim. Etymologically, these names share roots in ancient Semitic languages. Linguists have traced El and Elohim to a Proto-Semitic root meaning God or power. This root appears to have been adapted into the Sumerian name Enlil over time, with the En prefix potentially denoting Lord or Chief. Such connection is not coincidental. We see the connection in the fact that the names of these deities were written, then spoken in similar ways through the ages. This shared linguistic heritage suggests a common understanding of divinity and power across different cultures in the ancient Near East. Textual parallels between Sumerian myths and Old Testament stories provide even more compelling evidence for the influence of Enlil on Yahweh. Consider Enlil's role in the Sumerian flood narrative, where he decides to destroy humanity because of their noise and overpopulation. Does this not echo Yahweh's decision to flood the earth in the story of Noah, punishing humanity for their wickedness? The similarities in the depiction of divine wrath, justice, and the establishment of laws are unmistakable. The book of Genesis states God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. Then there is the Code of Hammurabi, which is extremely similar to the Ten Commandments given to Moses. Archaeological findings further bolster this connection. Shared artistic motifs, architectural styles, and religious practices suggest cultural continuity between Mesopotamia and ancient Israel. The discovery of ziggurats in Mesopotamia, for instance, bears a striking resemblance to the later construction of the temple in Jerusalem, which is no accident. The temple was deliberately built on top of the mountain to have it closer to the heavens. Furthermore, numerous examples of cylinder seals and pottery fragments with similar designs have been found in both regions. Numerous scholars argue for the influence of Mesopotamian religion on the development of early Judaism. The specific examples of borrowed concepts, rituals, and literary forms can be found throughout the Old Testament. It is no coincidence that Moses spent part of his childhood in Egypt, where there was heavy influence from Mesopotamia. The most striking example is the story of Moses in the bulrushes, which is nearly identical to a story about Sargon of Akkad 1,000 years earlier. But what cultural and political factors might have contributed to the merging of Enlil's attributes with Yahweh? Is it possible that the rise of monotheism required consolidating the powers and responsibilities of multiple deities into a single supreme God? Did early Hebrews adopt the concept of Yahweh so that they might have a single God to lead them through the desert? It's reasonable to speculate that Yahweh absorbed elements of Enlil to appeal to populations already familiar with Mesopotamian religious traditions. This guaranteed a smoother transition and wider acceptance of the new monotheistic faith. The concept of a high God was a common archetype in the ancient Near East, with Enlil and Yahweh representing different manifestations of this archetype. The high God archetype is an omnipresent concept across many cultures. Consider the rise of Zeus and the fall of the Titans. Also, the prevalence of Ra versus the other Egyptian gods points to a similar pattern. This also means that cultural exchange and religious syncretism played a significant role in shaping the development of monotheistic beliefs. It is, however, important to acknowledge the differences between Enlil and Yahweh. Some argue that Yahweh is portrayed as more transcendent and less directly involved in human affairs than Enlil. And it's true, after the giving of the Ten Commandments, Yahweh rarely makes an appearance. However, these differences may simply reflect the evolving theological views of ancient Israel. The shift from Enlil to Yahweh can be seen as a form of cultural appropriation. The Sumerian stories were co-opted, taken, and altered, which is a common practice throughout history. The Romans took the Greek gods, renamed them, and repurposed them for their own belief system. The degree of manipulation and intentional changing of the narrative is something that cannot be ignored. This leads us to another, perhaps more provocative question. If Enlil's legacy evolved into Yahweh, what were his personal reflections on his actions, and why might those reflections be actively suppressed? If Enlil was truly as complex as we have suggested, then is it possible he felt regret for his decisions? The very notion that Enlil, a powerful being, may have harbored regrets presents a challenge to the authority of later religious institutions. Enlil may have had regrets about his decisions, particularly regarding the flood and the creation of humanity. Such as regret is natural. Even in modern times, those who create weapons of war have felt deep remorse. The knowledge of these regrets might challenge the authority of later religious institutions, leading to its suppression. The Catholic Church only recently apologized for many of its previous actions. The Church even still hides documents deep in the Vatican Library. Is it possible that regret could cause one to hide what they've done, and that regret is just a natural extension of self-preservation? Are there passages from Sumerian texts where Enlil expresses remorse or doubts about his actions? In truth, such passages are hard to come by. What are more common are stories where Enlil states that his decisions are final. In one passage, Enlil laments the destruction caused by the flood, stating, "Why did I ever create humanity? Their clamor has disturbed my sleep." Yet even this is a backhanded admission of regret at best. Perhaps a more poignant line can be found from the story of Atrahasis, where Enlil states, "It was my sole decision." But we must ask ourselves, are these passages misinterpreted? Do they truly represent regret? Despite the ambiguity, let us analyze the potential reasons why Enlil's regrets might have been suppressed or downplayed in later religious traditions. Consider that admitting divine fallibility could undermine the authority of religious leaders and institutions. How can an institution justify its authority if it admits that the very foundation of that authority is flawed? It is also possible that a narrative of unwavering divine power and judgment was more useful for maintaining social control. People need to have an authority figure and feel that authority is infallible, so any cracks in that facade would create instability. This brings us to a discussion of the specific knowledge or technology that the Anunnaki possessed, and that may have been deliberately hidden from humanity. What if regrets were suppressed to obscure specific knowledge held by Enlil or the Anunnaki that was deemed too dangerous for humanity? What specific knowledge or technology did the Anunnaki possess, and why might it have been deemed too dangerous for humanity? Did the Anunnaki create a power source they later deemed too dangerous? There is evidence from Sumerian texts and archaeological findings that suggests that the Anunnaki possessed advanced knowledge of science, engineering, and medicine. From the use of advanced mathematics to create the pyramids to their precise tracking of the stars and planets, it is clear that the Anunnaki had an extremely advanced understanding of the universe. Perhaps the Anunnaki even had access to advanced energy sources, transportation systems, or communication devices. If it were one of these devices, what potential destructive force could be unleashed on humanity? But why was this advanced knowledge suppressed or lost? One possibility is that the Anunnaki deliberately limited human access to this knowledge to maintain control. How else would the Anunnaki ensure their place as the supreme species on this planet? Perhaps, too, the later civilizations may have lacked the capacity to understand or utilize this knowledge, leading to its eventual loss. It is like giving a calculator to someone who has never learned basic math. The knowledge would be useless without the proper foundation. And what about the possibility that some of this knowledge was deliberately destroyed or hidden by those seeking to maintain power? Was the Library of Alexandria burned for this very reason? What direct role did Enlil play in the suppression of Anunnaki knowledge? And what does this reveal about his true nature and motivations? Was Enlil complicit in the scheme to keep humanity ignorant? Or was he simply acting out of a sense of responsibility or a desire to protect humanity from itself? Consider that in the story of the Tower of Babel, it was Enlil who was responsible for destroying the tower and scattering humanity across the earth. The Bible states, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Did Enlil really do this to save humanity from itself? So, we have traced the evolution of Enlil to Yahweh, explored the potential reasons for the suppression of Enlil's regrets, and examined the hidden knowledge of the Anunnaki. Enlil's story is far more complex and nuanced than traditionally portrayed. The linguistic connections, textual parallels, archaeological findings, and scholarly interpretations all fit together to create a more complete picture of Enlil's life and actions. So, after considering all of this evidence, was Enlil a benevolent protector, a flawed ruler, or a manipulative tyrant? Was Enlil misunderstood, or was he purposely vilified? The answer, as we will soon discover, may be more complicated than we ever imagined. For now, it is vital to ask, what secrets lie buried beneath the sands of time, and what truths have been deliberately obscured from humanity's reach? Is it possible that Enlil's seemingly harsh actions, such as the flood and the suppression of knowledge, stemmed not from malice, but from a protective motive, a tough love approach to humanity's development? Was he not a cruel overlord, but a stern guardian, guiding humanity towards a future it couldn't yet comprehend? It's a question that challenges our conventional understanding of good and evil, of control versus guidance. The core of this inquiry rests on the concept of cosmic responsibility. Did Enlil believe he had a sacred duty to steer humanity in the right direction, even if it meant making difficult, even devastating choices? Was Enlil acting as a stern parent, making decisions for humanity's own good, even when those decisions were painful? The following will explore this tough love interpretation of Enlil, seeking to understand his reasoning, his motivations, and the potential wisdom behind his seemingly draconian actions. Consider passages from Sumerian texts where Enlil expresses concern for humanity's long-term well-being, even amidst destructive actions. The Atrahasis epic, for example, recounts the Anunnaki debating the fate of humanity, their burgeoning population creating an unbearable din that disturbed the gods' sleep. Enlil, the driving force behind the flood, argues for drastic measures, not out of spite, but out of a perceived necessity to restore cosmic order. He was saying, "The clamor of mankind has become too intense. I am robbed of sleep because of the hubbub." Furthermore, numerous Sumerian stories depict Enlil providing laws and guidance to humanity, aimed at creating a stable and prosperous society. The very foundations of civilization, from agriculture to governance, were attributed to his divine intervention. The Code of Hammurabi, a later Babylonian legal code, can be seen as a distant echo of this law-giving tradition, possibly inspired by Enlil's earlier efforts to establish order and justice among humankind. Hammurabi stated, "So that the strong should not harm the weak, in order that justice be given to the orphan and the widow." But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this tough love interpretation lies in the idea that Enlil's suppression of knowledge might have been intended to prevent humanity from destroying itself with technology it wasn't ready for. Imagine a child playing with a loaded weapon, or a society wielding the power of the atom without the wisdom to control it. Enlil, perhaps, foresaw the potential for self-destruction inherent in unchecked technological advancement. Now, this is the account of our modern-day concerns about the dangers of artificial intelligence or nuclear weapons. Are we not grappling with the very same dilemma that Enlil faced millennia ago? How to control powerful technologies and prevent them from falling into the wrong hands? Indeed, is it not Enlil who took humanity from a primitive hominid state to an advanced and thriving civilization? Was it not Enlil who taught the people to farm, build cities, and create intricate social structures? Can this all be deemed evil? Are there not some positive things that Enlil has done to assist humanity? What were the potential motivations behind Enlil's tough love approach? Perhaps he saw humanity as a flawed but promising creation, capable of great things but also prone to destructive tendencies. Speculate that he believed humanity needed to learn from its mistakes, even if those mistakes led to suffering, in order to truly grow and mature. This perspective challenges the notion of Enlil as a purely malevolent figure, suggesting a more complex and nuanced understanding of his role in human history. Enlil was saying, "I gave them the tools, it is up to them to use them wisely." This brings us to the idea that Enlil's actions were based on a longer-term perspective, aimed at ensuring humanity's survival over millennia, rather than immediate gratification. Was he willing to sacrifice short-term comfort and happiness for the sake of long-term sustainability? This is akin to modern-day debates about climate change or resource management, where short-term sacrifices are necessary for long-term sustainability. As it has been said, a stitch in time saves 9. It is vital to acknowledge the counterargument that Enlil's actions were simply a power grab, a way to maintain control over humanity. But can we truly dismiss the possibility of a more nuanced interpretation based on the available evidence? Could it be that Enlil was genuinely concerned about humanity's fate, even if his methods were questionable? What if, as some suggest, knowledge without wisdom is a dangerous thing, and Enlil sought to prevent humanity from acquiring knowledge it wasn't ready to handle? And what about this knowledge? Is it possible that the knowledge was simply too advanced for humanity to understand and utilize it properly? Or was the suppression of knowledge a means to control the population? Some Sumerian texts state, knowledge is power, and power must be controlled. Regardless, the evidence suggests that there was a deliberate attempt to keep certain knowledge out of the hands of humanity. But if Enlil acted out of a sense of responsibility, how was his image tarnished over time, and who benefited from this distortion? Was there a deliberate effort to portray him as a cruel and capricious tyrant, rather than a complex and conflicted leader? This raises a critical question. Who had the power to rewrite history and why? Perhaps human priests and kings, seeking to legitimize their own power, twisted Enlil's legacy to suit their agendas. By portraying themselves as the chosen representatives of a wrathful god, they could more easily control the population and maintain their authority. This manipulation of Enlil's image may have been a deliberate attempt to consolidate power and suppress dissent. The people were saying, "We must obey the priests and kings, for they speak for the gods." Now, let's explore the concept that after Enlil's reign or departure, human priests and kings began to interpret his legacy to suit their own agendas. Consider the examples of later Mesopotamian rulers claiming divine authority based on a distorted version of Enlil's teachings. These rulers, eager to legitimize their power, may have selectively emphasized certain aspects of Enlil's character, such as his role as a lawgiver and judge, while downplaying his more compassionate or benevolent qualities. Hammurabi stated, "I am the chosen one of Enlil, to bring justice to the land." It is interesting to think about the construction of ziggurats and temples dedicated to Enlil, where his image may have been manipulated to promote the power of the priesthood. These massive structures, designed to impress and intimidate, served as tangible symbols of Enlil's authority, and by extension, the authority of the priests who controlled them. The priests were saying, "These temples are the house of Enlil, and we are his servants." Also, consider the changing role of kings and priests from Enlil's original design. Initially, these figures may have served as intermediaries between the Annunaki and humanity, guiding and teaching the people. However, over time, they may have become more focused on consolidating their own power, using Enlil's name to justify their actions. The Annunaki tasked these beings with shepherding mankind, and now they hoard it for themselves. How did these changes contribute to a distorted image of Enlil over time? And why might later traditions have actively suppressed the original, more nuanced portrayal? Was there a deliberate effort to erase the memory of a more complex and humanized Enlil, replacing it with a caricature of divine wrath and judgment? Could it be that a more complex and humanized Enlil would have been less useful for maintaining social control than a figure of unquestioning authority and judgment? The priests and kings were saying, "Enlil is all-powerful and all-knowing, and we are his chosen representatives on earth." Perhaps competing religious factions may have deliberately demonized Enlil to undermine the legitimacy of their rivals. In the ancient Near East, where religious beliefs were often intertwined with political power, discrediting a rival's patron deity could be an effective way to weaken their influence. The other factions were saying Enlil is a false god, and his followers are misguided. Is it fair to demonize somebody after they are gone and unable to defend their name? If Enlil's legacy has been manipulated for millennia, can we still access his true wisdom and learn from his experiences? Or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, blinded by distorted narratives and self-serving interpretations? The words, "Let us not forget the past, lest we are doomed to repeat it," ring true. Modern interpretations of Enlil's story may offer valuable insights into human nature, leadership, and the challenges of technological advancement. By examining his actions through a critical lens, we can gain a better understanding of the complexities of power, responsibility, and the ethical dilemmas that arise when advanced knowledge falls into human hands. The great ones were saying, "The past is the key to the future." Many modern views of Enlil are potentially skewed, and we must learn to weed out the false information. Modern interpretations of Enlil's story in books, websites, and documentaries reflect the ongoing interest in the Anunnaki. Some theories suggest that Enlil's knowledge or influence is still present, albeit hidden, in certain esoteric traditions or scientific discoveries. The people were saying, "The truth is out there, we just have to find it." Is it that the best-kept secrets are right out in the open? Indeed, many researchers today are exploring the ethical implications of genetic engineering or artificial intelligence, drawing parallels to Enlil's actions. Are we, in a sense, repeating the experiments of the Anunnaki, and are we destined to face the same consequences? The scientists were saying, "We must proceed with caution, lest we unleash something we cannot control." But why this continued fascination with Enlil and the Anunnaki, and what are the potential implications for humanity's future? Perhaps the answer lies in the power of archetypes and the enduring appeal of ancient myths. Enlil represents a timeless figure of authority, responsibility, and the struggle to guide humanity. He is the archetypal father figure, both benevolent and stern, whose actions shape the course of human history. The poets were saying, "The stories of the past are the mirrors of the future." Perhaps, too, Enlil's story offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of ethical considerations in technological development, and the need for a balanced approach to knowledge and wisdom. By studying his successes and failures, we can learn valuable lessons about how to navigate the challenges of the modern world. As the wise ones were saying, learn from the mistakes of others, for you cannot live long enough to make them all yourself. Enlil's experience can most assuredly help future leaders. If a leader studies Enlil, perhaps he can learn from Enlil's mistakes and make better decisions. It is important to remember the mistakes of the past, so that we do not repeat them. For the future leaders were saying, I must learn from the past, so that I may lead wisely. So, after considering all of this evidence, can we finally understand Enlil's true motivations and appreciate the complexity of his character? We have journeyed from Enlil as a complex Annunaki leader, acting out of a sense of responsibility, to his manipulated image in later traditions, and finally, to his potential relevance today. His story is far more complex and nuanced than traditionally portrayed. His actions may have been driven by a desire to protect and guide humanity. The connections between his role as a creator, his tough love approach to leadership, the manipulation of his legacy, and his enduring relevance to modern-day concerns are all extremely important. Does this mean that Enlil's original intent has been tainted? Did his narrative take on a life of its own? What secrets lie buried beneath the sands of time, and what truths have been deliberately obscured from humanity's reach? What is the final takeaway? Did you know that what we are about to share with you is a first-hand account, and this account comes directly from Enlil himself? Now we must specify that this account should be viewed critically, considering the possibility of further manipulation or bias, even within this direct perspective. Remember that discerning truth is a layered process. Imagine a rediscovered text, etched on clay tablets unearthed from a forgotten temple, or perhaps a channeled message received by a modern-day mystic. This serves as the alleged source of Enlil's intimate narrative. But can we truly understand a historical figure without considering their personal perspective, even if that perspective is filtered through layers of interpretation and potential distortion? This account has the potential to challenge existing narratives and offer a more complete picture of Enlil, but proceed with caution. The following words are purported to be from Enlil himself, speaking from across the millennia, giving an account of the pre-flood world and his growing concern about humanity's trajectory. In the beginning, so the account begins, I held such high hopes for humanity. We, the Annunaki, saw in them a reflection of ourselves, a potential to cultivate a world of order and prosperity. But alas, they deviated from our vision. Their ambition grew unchecked, their compassion waned, and their violence spread like a plague across the face of Tiamat, the earth. Enlil's perspective also sheds light on the Annunnaki's internal conflicts and the pressures they faced on Nibiru, leading to their intervention on Earth. Our home world Nibiru was dying, Enlil's account continues. Resources dwindled and tensions flared. The discovery of gold on Earth offered a lifeline, a chance to save our civilization. But to extract that gold, we needed laborers, and thus, humanity was born. This was no act of selfless creation, but a desperate measure driven by survival. Herein lies the rationale for the flood, framed not as an act of malice, but as a painful but necessary correction to prevent humanity from destroying itself, and potentially the planet. I watched with growing dismay as humanity descended into chaos, Enlil purportedly stated. Their wars threatened to tear the very fabric of the planet. Their disregard for the delicate balance of nature jeopardized the future of all living things. The flood was not a punishment, but a mercy, a chance to start anew. Enlil added, it pained me to do it, however, there was no other option. It is written that Enlil felt he was making a personal sacrifice, expressing sorrow for the loss of life but conviction in the necessity of his actions. Every life lost in the flood weighed heavily on my heart, the account continues. But I believed and still believe that it was the only way to prevent a greater catastrophe, Sometimes, the hardest choices are the most necessary. But was it truly necessary? Enlil's perspective on the creation of humanity explores the idea that he saw humans as a potential solution to the Annunnaki's problems, but also as a source of unforeseen challenges. He was saying, we sought to create a being that could serve us, but we inadvertently created a being capable of surpassing us, of challenging our authority, of threatening our very existence. The ethical implications of genetic engineering are vast, and the potential for unintended consequences is ever present. Are the actions of the Anunnaki a cautionary tale? The decision to unleash the flood was driven by a sense of responsibility to protect the Earth and the Anunnaki from the destructive potential of humanity. Enlil said, I saw the potential for humanity to heal the Earth, to cultivate its resources sustainably, and to live in harmony with nature. But I also saw the potential for them to exploit the Earth, to pollute its waters, and to deplete its resources until nothing remained. The flood was a desperate attempt to reset the balance. Compare this to modern-day concerns about environmental degradation and the need for drastic measures to mitigate climate change. Are we on the verge of our own flood, brought about not by divine intervention, but by our own actions? Acknowledge the limitations of this first-hand account. Recognize that it is still subject to interpretation and may reflect Enlil's own biases or rationalizations. It also begs the question, who rediscovered this text? What was their purpose for releasing it to the world? I know that my actions will be judged harshly by some, Enlil purportedly said. But I ask you to consider my perspective, to understand the pressures I faced, and to recognize that I acted out of a sense of responsibility, not malice. It is up to you to decide what you believe. Accessing historical truth is a challenge, and it is important to consider multiple perspectives. What were Enlil's intentions after the flood, and how did he attempt to steer humanity towards a more positive future? He remained committed to humanity's well-being and sought to provide them with the tools and knowledge they needed to rebuild their civilization. Enlil said the flood may have cleansed the earth, but it also left humanity vulnerable and Bengali. Nda enus Bengali, Hashoikat enus Bengali, Ntalebashoinus, Oriented. I knew that they needed guidance, laws, and knowledge to rebuild their societies, and to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. The following is Enlil's account of his efforts to provide humanity with laws, agriculture, and other essential knowledge after the flood. I worked with the survivors, teaching them how to cultivate the land, how to build cities, and how to govern themselves, Enlil stated in the text. I established laws to protect the weak from the strong, to ensure justice and fairness, and to promote peace and harmony. The cities of Eridu and Nippur were the cornerstones of this new era. The establishment of cities and the development of writing were key milestones in Enlil's plan for humanity's recovery. Analyze Enlil's motivations for providing humanity with this guidance, exploring the idea that he saw it as a way to atone for the destruction caused by the flood. He stated, I felt a deep sense of responsibility for the lives that were lost in the flood. I knew that I could never fully repay that debt, but I could at least try to create a better future for those who survived. The ethical implications of intervening in human affairs are complex. Even with the best intentions, there is always the potential for unintended consequences. Acknowledge the counterargument that Enlil's actions were simply a way to maintain control over humanity, but also provide a more nuanced interpretation based on his first-hand account. The people were saying, Enlil is not our savior, but our oppressor. He seeks to control our every move, to stifle our freedom, and to keep us in perpetual servitude. But Enlil expressed, I sought not to control, but to guide. I offered them the tools and the knowledge they needed to build their own civilizations, to chart their own destinies, to become truly independent. The question remains, Did Enlil do too little too late? After all was said and done, Enlil reflected on the Annunnaki's departure from Earth and his concerns about humanity's future without their direct guidance. And this is what he was saying. The time came for us to depart, to return to Nibiru, and to leave humanity to its own devices. I had hoped that they would use the knowledge and the tools we had given them to create a world of peace, prosperity, and harmony. But I also feared that they would succumb to their old ways, to their greed, their violence, and their thirst for power. What were Enlil's concerns about humanity's future after the Anunnaki left Earth, and what measures did he take to prepare them for independence? Enlil's account reveals his worries about humanity's capacity for self-destruction and his attempts to instill a sense of responsibility and ethical behavior. I tried to warn them of the dangers that lay ahead, Enlil purportedly stated. I spoke of the importance of balance, of the need to respect the earth and its resources, and of the consequences of unchecked ambition and greed. I left them with the Code of Hammurabi. The efforts to establish a system of laws and moral principles would guide humanity towards a more sustainable and harmonious future. These concerns can be analyzed in the context of modern-day challenges, drawing parallels to issues such as climate change, social inequality, and the potential for technological dystopia. Consider how the people are saying, "We are repeating the mistakes of the past, and we are heading towards our own destruction." It seems that Enlil's teachings are relevant to contemporary debates about ethics, leadership, and the need for a global sense of responsibility. Enlil's legacy offers valuable insights into how to navigate the challenges of the 21st century and create a more sustainable and equitable future for humanity. This can only be done by hearing the lessons and stories of the past. He said, "I planted the seeds. It is up to you to cultivate them. It is up to you to choose your own destiny." Perhaps Enlil's biggest lesson is to strive for balance. Given all of this evidence, what is the ultimate takeaway from Enlil's story, and how can we apply it to our own lives and choices? This first-hand account offers a unique and intimate glimpse into Enlil's complex character, but it must be interpreted critically and in conjunction with other sources. To synthesize all the evidence, show how the Sumerian texts, archaeological findings, scholarly interpretations, and Enlil's own words fit together to create a more complete picture of his life and legacy. The connections between his motivations, his actions, and the lasting impact of his decisions on humanity's trajectory are all extremely important. Enlil has said, "I sought to create a better world for humanity, but my actions had unintended consequences. I offer this to you. Learn from my mistakes and strive to create a future worthy of your potential." The power of interpretation and action will shape the next stage of the human story. Was he justified in doing what he did, or was he a tyrant? What are we supposed to glean from Enlil's own words? As we reach the end of this exploration into the multifaceted history of Enlil, the God who created Eden and became known as Yahweh, let us synthesize the key elements of his story and contemplate the enduring echoes of his actions. After carefully examining the Sumerian texts, the archaeological findings, the scholarly interpretations, and even the purported first-hand account from Enlil himself, what are we to make of this enigmatic figure? Enlil, whether a divine being, an extraterrestrial commander, or simply a leader driven by complex motivations, presents a formidable challenge to traditional narratives of human origin and divine intervention. Throughout this journey, we have explored his role as a creator, his controversial decision regarding the Great Flood, the evolution of his image into that of Yahweh, and the suppression of what might be considered dangerous or destabilizing knowledge. Like a complex puzzle, Enlil's story reveals both a desire to guide and to control humanity. It is a story comprised of intricate pieces that, when fitted together, show his true motivation stemming from cosmic oversight. By understanding Enlil, a new perspective can be opened to question established religious narratives. In doing so, one can critically assess the forces that have shaped and continue to shape human history. While Enlil is often presented as a singular, monolithic entity within the Anunnaki pantheon, might it be possible that Enlil was in fact a title? Perhaps this title was passed down through generations of Anunnaki leaders, with each individual interpreting and enacting their role in subtly different ways. And if Enlil's actions, even the harsh ones, were ultimately driven by a desire to protect humanity from self-destruction, does that in any way justify the immense suffering he caused? Or does it instead serve as a stark cautionary tale about the inherent dangers of unchecked power, even when wielded with ostensibly good intentions? Enlil's story, then, is not merely an account of gods and aliens. It is a timeless and resonant narrative concerning the perpetual struggle between creation and destruction, control and freedom, knowledge and wisdom, a struggle that continues to define the human experience, echoing across the millennia. The complex narrative of Enlil resonates with universal themes of responsibility, sacrifice, and the multifaceted consequences of wielding immense power, themes that remain profoundly relevant to leaders and individuals throughout history. Understanding Enlil's pervasive influence offers invaluable insight into the intricate interconnectedness of ancient cultures, the gradual evolution of religious beliefs, and humanity's ceaseless quest for meaning and purpose within the vast cosmic tapestry. Furthermore, the enduring legacy of Enlil compels us to confront the ethical implications inherent in advanced technology, the imperative of responsible leadership, and the latent potential for humanity to collectively forge a more sustainable and equitable future for generations to come. Whether the actions of Enlil were justified or not, the knowledge gained from his trials and tribulations shows both the benefits and pitfalls of power and the importance of moral judgment. Despite the daunting challenges and persistent uncertainties that lie ahead, we can draw invaluable lessons from the complex and often contradictory story of Enlil. We can strive to cultivate choices rooted in understanding, compassion, and a genuine concern for the collective well-being of all living beings. The enduring mysteries surrounding Enlil and the Anunnaki serve as a potent reminder of the sheer vastness and inherent complexity of the known universe. Furthermore, they are a testament to the endless possibilities that await discovery, and to the indomitable power of the human spirit to relentlessly seek knowledge, meaning, and a deeper understanding of our place within the grand cosmic order. Personally, exploring Enlil's complex history has inspired me to carefully consider the potential moral implications of any story. If you have found this deep dive into the history and mysteries surrounding Enlil to be enlightening, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Astral Legends for more explorations into the hidden corners of ancient history and forgotten lore. May the knowledge we have shared inspire you to question, explore, and above all, to seek your own version of the truth. And join us next time as we delve into the mysteries of the Anunnaki once more to visit the secrets of the pyramids and the coming pyramid wars. May the eternal light forever guide your path. From challenging the current beliefs to finding true enlightenment, it is a must that you forever stay curious.